Hi, I'm Michael from One Sky, and I want to take a look at a redo of an older video that some of you that are familiar with my channel will recognize, but the audio quality was really bad. My computer at the time was dying, and I wanted to just remake it, make it a little clearer, hopefully present the information in a little bit of a better way. So I want to take a look at some really excellent software. There is a program called Stellarium. Stellarium's open source software that allows you to look at the skies in real time. So right now it's about 2 in the afternoon, and so we're seeing the sun high in the sky. But you can get the sun and the ground out of there and just look at the stars. And again, this is astronomy. This is real time. This is an astronomically accurate look at the heavens right now. This is a great program. It's a free and open source program, so you can download it for Mac, Windows, Linux, whatever you use. We can see here the sun is in the constellation of Pisces. That's Uranus here, also really out on the eastern border of Pisces by what's called the northern fish and close to Aries. So that's the sun, Uranus. Here's Mars in Taurus, close to Aries, and we can see the stars and planets. I'm showing the optional constellation boundaries, but we can get those out of here too. So this program has a lot of uses. Here's Mercury in Aquarius and Venus in Aquarius. We can see the constellation of Capricornus setting. And we can see that rising is, looks like Gemini, although, yeah, the stars of Cancer are actually rising. That would be considered Cancer rising. And this is like a scientifically accurate way of looking at the heavens. This is where stars and planets actually are. If I were to get outside and orient a telescope to the skies, this is exactly what I would see. And when it comes to astrology, that presents a couple problems, because here is a tropical chart, and looking at a tropical chart, a tropical zodiac, is what mainstream Western astrology uses in its calculations of its signs. So if I get this out, I'm going to see, very quickly that the sun is in Aries, and that's not matching up with what I see when I look in the actual skies. And as a scientifically minded person, this can be really problematic for people who are exposed to astrology, or exposed to mainstream Western astrology, because already there's a discrepancy. If someone looks at their astrology and it says, oh, Uranus is in the constellation of, or in the sign of Taurus here, and then they orient themselves to the actual heavens and look and see that Uranus isn't in Taurus. It's 2 signs over. It's 2 signs over in the realm of Pisces. Well, I think people rightfully have the question, what's that about? why did that happen and which one is correct. Now, the argument for the tropical zodiac and mainstream Western astrology is that it's oriented to the seasons. And every spring, right around the vernal equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, which is March. It was March 20th this year, but it's usually around the 20th, 21st, 22nd. The tropical zodiac reorients that point where the sun rose on that date to 0 degrees Aries. So another name for the tropical zodiac is the moving zodiac, because each year it's getting adjusted. Now, one of the reasons it's getting adjusted is because the fixed stars, or what we call the fixed stars, are actually moving ever so slightly. This is called celestial procession, or the procession of the equinox. And every 72 years, the fixed stars move 1 degree. So you could say that in about the span of a human lifetime, we'll see just the tiniest, almost an unobservable bit of movement in the heavens. But over time, over generations, centuries, millennium, this gets to be really problematic from the point of view of the relationship of astronomy to astrology. And as you can see, this is one example. Uranus here in early Taurus is actually, if you look celestially, if you look sidereally, sidereal meaning oriented to the stars themselves, you would see Uranus right about here in one of the later degrees of Pisces. And the sun is absolutely just not in Aries. I mean, there's no working around that. So from a sidereal point of view, from an astronomically accurate point of view, what we have is a bunch of ancient ideas, a body of ancient ideas about the energies of the stars and planets that come down to us as a part of our ancestral human heritage. What you have is a tradition of sky watching and of noting the patterns of the unfolding of events on Earth and in people's personalities. That was practiced in every culture that we know of. And the way that it was practiced wasn't using a zodiac like the mainstream Western tradition uses today, but it was actually looking at the actual stars. We know that the ancient Maya, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Vedic, Indo-Himalayan, Chinese. We know that the ancient Mesopotamian, the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian peoples were orienting themselves to the actual heavens, and they were watching the actual motion of the actual visible planets through the actual stars. They weren't calculating, like we do today, that, well, this is the constellation of Aries, but let's just put Aries over here. None of that. that came later, and it came with a decision around 2,000 years ago to shift the ancient Babylonians and eventually the Greeks, which largely inherited that Babylonian system of astrology, shifted from orienting themselves to the actual stars to orienting themselves to a zodiac based on the northern hemisphere seasons. And they did that because they noticed that the stars were drifting. They noticed that the stars were moving. And what it seems like, we aren't really sure, but what it seems like is that they felt that it was an untrustworthy reference point. They felt that the point that the sun rose on the vernal equinox was a more trustworthy reference point. And so in their understanding, they made that shift. And that understanding was largely based on an Aristotelian model of the world in which the earth was fixed. It was the unmoving center of the universe, which rotated around it. And that's certainly how it seems. It's certainly how it looks. But we know today that, the sun is a star, and like all the other stars, and that the earth and planets move around it. Where does that leave us today? There's so much richness in the tradition of Western astrology. There's so much of value, and there's so much to gain from the point of view of personal empowerment and living in harmony with the seasons. And by the seasons, I don't mean winter, spring, summer, fall, but I mean the seasons of life and of our lives and the celestial seasons. So another way to orient a zodiac is a sidereal zodiac. And commonly, a sidereal zodiac will use even signs, 12 even signs of 30 degrees, much like the tropical zodiac. But instead of being oriented to the northern hemisphere seasons, they're oriented to the actual fixed stars. They're much more accurate. But this zodiac that you're looking at is an uneven sign zodiac that's oriented precisely to the fixed stars, meaning that because Aries is a smaller constellation than Pisces, there on the left you have Aries, and you can see that it takes up less degrees than Pisces here, which is more sprawled out. In a true sidereal zodiac, you have the sign of Aries actually taking up less space than the sign of Pisces. And here, when we look and we check in a true sidereal chart, here's Uranus, and Uranus is in late Pisces. And here's the sun. It's not in Aries, it's in Pisces. Well, let's check again. Yeah, that's accurate to the actual heavens. Here's Uranus in late Pisces, and here is the sun, nowhere else but in Pisces. The ancient tradition of sky watching and noting the patterns and the similarities between the world within and the world without, the world above and the world below our world, that tradition of noticing patterns of archetypes, of meanings, developing mythology, sidereal mythology. Again, it came out of watching the stars and planets themselves. So another way to say that is that all of our ideas about Pisces come from this ancient history of watching planets, watching the sun and moon move through the stars of Pisces, the actual constellation of Pisces. All of our ideas about the sign of Pisces came from watching the actual heavens. To the degree that Manetho writes in his introduction to his translation of Ptolemy's Almagest that the word in Greek for what we call astrology wasn't astrology. That's like a new word. But the word in Greek translated to divination by means of astronomy or astronomical divination. And, you know, it's easy to see that if it was divination by means of astronomy, and you wanted your divination to be accurate, that the best thing to do would be to use a system that's astronomically accurate. And that is, in a nutshell, why I practice true sidereal astrology, because they are the most accurate readings I've ever given or received. It was, for me, a real eye-opener, especially as someone who didn't relate to my tropical chart, coming to understand more about sidereal astrology, the roots and the history of Western astrology, and ultimately to be introduced to true sidereal astrology was like, it was like the needle just slid into that groove in the record, and oh man, the music just started. Something had always been a little off before, and this really cleared it up for me. And the more I practice in this way, the more I get that feedback from other people that it's very accurate to their experience of themselves, and very, very accurate as an interpretive or a predictive method. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.